Hi everyone, this is John Gerardi with Right to Life of Central California, bringing you another in our 40 videos for 40 days series. 40 Days for Life is the international campaign of prayer and presence outside abortion clinics throughout the country and throughout the world. If you want to learn more about our 40 Days for Life campaign in Fresno or our ongoing throughout the year efforts doing sidewalk advocacy outside of the Planned Parenthood on Fulton Street, please get in touch with us at 559-229-2229. Today I want to talk very quickly about a concept that I think is important for how we communicate the pro-life message to people who disagree with us. And it's this idea of the moral imagination, how to develop the moral imagination in people, whether it's in children, whether it's in those we disagree with. What do I mean by moral imagination? Basically, it's kind of a fancy way of just saying empathy, of having people realize that when we talk about these different kinds of life issues, when we talk about life issues as they relate to a fetus, as they relate to an embryo, someone very small, someone who seems in many ways to be not a morally significant person, someone who maybe can't think the way that we do, someone who doesn't have all of the same kinds of developed human capacities that we do, or even at the end of life, to look at someone, someone suffering from severe illness or from mental handicap or from accident. I think of someone like Terry Schiavo. The instinct of many on the pro-choice side is to look at these kinds of individuals in these kinds of vulnerable situations and to treat them differently based on their lack of development, their lack of capacity, and to say that, well, we don't owe that person the same kind of care, almost to act as though this person is completely other to ourselves as fully functioning, thriving humans. And I think this is a fundamentally flawed way of looking at our fellow man for a lot of reasons, but not the least of which is it's just a lack of empathy. It's a lack of understanding that you have been in that position. All of you who are watching this video were an embryo once. You were a zygote once. You were an embryo, you were a fetus, you were someone utterly dependent on other people. To develop that sort of moral imagination, to sort of see in those who are weak, those who are in need, to see yourself. And this isn't just, there are some people who have a very lively moral imagination outside of the context of abortion. They can see themselves in the person who is homeless. They can see themselves in the person who's addicted to drugs. They can see themselves even in the person who has committed some crime and can say, there but for the grace of God go I. That, I sometimes look at someone who has maybe committed a horrible crime, and while certainly I think the justice system needs to play its role, and I'm not saying you should let people who commit crimes off the hook, but one thing I do try to think of is, if I hadn't had the advantages that I had growing up with a loving, supportive parents and a stable family and good household, and the advantages that I had, could I not have wound up in this person's shoes? Could I not have wound up in that person's shoes? And developing this lively moral imagination, I think, can help us not to be wrongly judgmental of other persons. Again, not to say that people who do bad things shouldn't go to jail necessarily or face just punishments for crimes. But it's a good and important thing for helping us understand our fellow man and love our fellow man and build up a society based on justice. And this is, I think, a really good thing for when we talk with our children, as we educate our children, to think about things like, how do you, when you talk with your children, how do you relate to, for example, someone with Down syndrome? How do you relate to perhaps a very elderly person who's in need of assistance? In how you communicate about those kinds of people with your children. How do you talk to your children about such persons? To see in every single human person, I guess for those of us from the Christian tradition, to see in every single human person the image and likeness of God, and is something that's so important and to see that we aren't valuable as human beings because we can do all of these kind of uniquely human things, engage in intellectual reasoning, speech, make future plans for ourselves. If that's what it means to be human, then we fundamentally accept that some human beings are just more important than others. Albert Einstein's more important than me. I'm more important than someone who only has had a fourth grade education. If that's the way we look at humanity, then that becomes true. And that's why I think such a viewpoint towards humanity is false, because I don't think Albert Einstein was more important than me, and I don't think I'm more important than someone who only had a fourth grade education. I think there's a fundamental human dignity and value that isn't inherent to your intellectual achievements, your intellectual capacity, your physical stature, how much money you have. And to be able to see yourself in other people, for me to see in, for example, the person with only a third grade education, that, wow, I had so many more opportunities than this person, and I could have been in his shoes, and this person still is someone important and a person of infinite value and dignity who needs to be respected and honored as my fellow man. The development of a moral imagination, seeing yourself in others, seeing the importance of other people, even if they don't have all of the capacities that you have, and to see that, boy, I could have been in that person's shoes, or indeed that I was in that person's shoes, is something so important, I think, when we talk about the topic of abortion. What if I had been conceived in rape? Would I have wanted to be aborted? What if I were conceived at an inopportune or inconvenient or even financially difficult and financially stress-inducing time? Would I have wanted to be aborted, or would I have wanted to be born? Would I have wanted to had a mother who loved me enough to place me for adoption? It's these kinds of ways of thinking about abortion that I think are really powerful and really important for breaking through a lot of the ways that our in many ways very cold society looks at the question of the unborn child. Let's try to see in the unborn a reflection of ourselves, because we all were a fetus. We all were an embryo at one point. For Right to Life of Central California, I'm John Gerardi.